Hello comrades and welcome to Just One More Watch. Welcome today to my review of the first watch in space. I'm sure that most people viewing this video would herald the Omega Speedmaster as the first watch on the moon, but I'm not sure how many of you would know that the first watch in space was a Sturmanskie. Now, oddly enough, the first watch in space was on the wrist of the first man in space, that being Yuri Gagarin. Here he is in his full Russian cosmonaut glory. I just love those orange suits. Here he is in 1960, strapped into one of their dubious looking capsules. The following year, on the 12th of April 1961, he strapped himself into this thing. My goodness, that looks like a model from the Thunderbirds TV show. He's a braver man than I am, that's for sure. No wonder he's looking a little bit more pensive in this particular photo. Nonetheless, the launch was successful and Gagarin became the first man to leave Earth's atmosphere and to do a complete orbit of the planet in outer space. No wonder therefore he's looking a little bit more relaxed and a little bit more pleased with himself in this photo. Not only is it remarkable that he made it into space, it's also remarkable that he made it back, considering the state of the capsule upon its return, though admittedly Gagarin did launch himself out by parachute about 7 kilometers up and float down by separate cover to a hero's welcome. And here is our hero Gagarin, proudly wearing his Sturmanskie and receiving the plaudits from the Soviet generals. He also received the Hero of the Soviet Union medal, the highest honour that was available at the time. Unfortunately, he didn't actually have too many years to bask in the glory of his achievements. He was one of 2 pilots killed whilst testing a MiG-15 trainer jet in 1968 at the age of only 35. Here are some of the many thousands of Soviets that gathered in Moscow's Red Square to say goodbye to him at his funeral in 1968. So, Yuri Gagarin then, the first man in space, Sturmanskie, the first watch in space. Or was it? Let's rewind back to 1961 and have another look at that photo. That is what I would describe as a piece of creative photoshopping. There is absolutely no way that that circular highlight actually matches what is going on his wrist at the time. And indeed, there is some considerable consternation as to what watch was on Gagarin's wrist in 1961 when he was the first man to make it into space. Some say it was a watch by a brand called Podeba, others say it was a watch by a brand called Rodina, but they do say that the winners write history, and it appears that Sturmanskie have won this particular debate. Since 2000, they have released a range of watches with Gagarin's name and with Gagarin's face crucially attached to them. They are the only watch brand officially allowed to do that, and they herald this particular model that I'm about to show you as being the one that Gagarin wore on that Vostok 1 space mission. And indeed, they offer a selection of Gagarin branded and sort of endorsed watches today in a variety of different sizes, different colours and different dial patterns. They've even got a little bit ahead of the game and designed a watch suitable for Mars, though quite whether that one will ever see action on the surface of the red planet is up for debate. Now, this is the version that I have got to show you today. It's actually sold out on their website. I'll leave a couple of links in the description of the video. It's still available from other outlets. And it is apparently one of the more authentic versions. It's a manual wind and it features the same Polyot 2609 movement as worn by Gagarin in his Sturmanskie in 1961. Assuming, of course, that he did actually wear a Sturmanskie. Let's flip the camera and have a look at it. Alright, before we go on, a big shout out to Adam over in Melbourne, aka Blue Moose Racing on Instagram. He loaned me this one from his personal collection. Adam has loaned me a ton of stuff over the last 4 years now. Thank you for your generosity and thank you also for your patience, Adam. It took me a while to get around to this one. He loaned me it well before Christmas. Now, he paid 520 Aussie dollars for this one. That's roughly 375 USD. That seems to be the going rate for these. This one being the model number 2609. That's the reference to that movement that I mentioned in the intro. 3745200. Definitely not a spec monster today. You're buying this one because you like the way it looks and you're buying it for that story. which may or may not be true. But hey, let's not let the truth get in the way of a good story. And it's one of these watches that I think both looks and feels a little larger than it is. As I said, they do these in a variety of sizes from 42 right down to 35. I believe the original, as worn possibly by Gagarin, was a 33. This one is a 40, so 40 millimeters in diameter, but I would have sworn it was bigger than that. I guess it's because it is all dial. It does have a bezel, but look, that bezel barely encroaches in the dial space, so yeah, it looks and feels bigger, I think. Only 11.7mm thick, thanks to that relatively thin and relatively ancient manual wind movement. 47 lug to lug with a bit of downturn, you'll see it on wrist in a minute or two. 20mm lug width, and on this supplied Sturmanskie leather-ish strap, it weighs in at 66 grams. Let's start with a look at the strap then. Russian cows must be made of tough stuff because yeah, it is a little bit tough. But I have to admit, I've softened to this one as it has softened to my wrist over the last couple of weeks. Sturmanskie branded, kind of patent faux croc leather here, but at least it has nice red stitching, picking out the red star on the dial, the red second hand, little red index there at the 12 o'clock. Hardware is a tad disappointing, very plain brushed buckle and tang. I guess though it is period specific, and with 20mm lug width, you'll have no problem swapping this out for something else. You can even pop it on a NATO if that is not mixing your military alliances too much. Now the case finish is actually alright. Fine brushing, running longitudinally lug to lug on the case, the side of the case, high polish to the upper lug surfaces, and that very thin stepped high polish bezel. Crown is unsigned, it's a good size and it's nice and grippy, which is just as well because it's very, very thin. Now this is a manual wind watch, but because the crown almost protrudes towards the south of the case, you still get a decent grip on it. Now that is a lovely piece of glass. However, it's only mineral crystal. It is admittedly the nicest piece of mineral crystal I've seen, I think, double domed with a distinct purple anti-reflective undercoating, but yeah, only mineral crystal for $375. Like I said, not a spec monster. While we're here, I may as well tell you that that crown is push-pull and it only has 30 meters of water resistance. But you're not really buying this one for the specs as intimated, you're buying it for the Gagarin connection, which is displayed proudly on that gorgeous case back. Definitely one of the nicest case backs I've seen for under $1,000, that's for sure. Beautifully embossed, full of texture, bead blasted back surface, and Gagarin himself in his cosmonaut helmet is high polished. Now you see the Cyrillic text around the outer edge. You also see a limited number down the bottom there, this being 1641 of 2000. I'm not sure whether that's 2000 for each individual colour, of which there are many, and I mean many, or whether it's 200 for all of these Gagarin tie-in watches. Regardless, this one's just about sold out, so somebody's buying them, despite or perhaps because of that ancient movement. Now, that is not bad for a movement that can trace its origins back to the 1960s, is it? 17 jewel, manual wind obviously, but non-hacking. Roughly 38-hour power reserve, so you're winding this one daily really, day and a half at most. Very healthy amplitude, no beat error at the correct 51-degree lift angle, 21,600 vibrations per hour, so 6 ticks of the second hand per second, plus 4 seconds per day. That's alright. Frankly, I'm a bit stunned. That's much better than I was expecting. Having reviewed a number of Russian watches in the past that got nowhere, and I mean nowhere near zero. So a surprisingly effective movement then, and a surprisingly attractive dial considering it came out of the Soviet Union in the 1960s. Yes, I'm talking to you, Vostok Komandirsky. Look at those numerals. Those are gorgeous. Check the 2s, check the kind of diagonal slash cut to the top of the 1s, the fact that the 0 is quite small. I think it all looks fantastic. Now, just a printed dial, there is loom on those numerals, so they are somewhat raised, though they've used a kind of black loom. That does have its downsides, as you'll see in a couple of minutes. It's the same with the hands. They've used a kind of black grey loom paint on there as well. Now, the hands themselves are actually blue, or at least the hour hand and the minute hand are. I would imagine that those are painted rather than thermally blued. It certainly looks that way. You can see a kind of raised profile to them. Really nice long minute hand pushing all the way out to that train track minute track. beyond those numerals. The Cyrillic under the 12 says Sturmanskie, and I'm not really all that sure what those other two insignias are, one above the pinion and one beneath it, so if anybody here knows more than I do, which isn't hard, please leave me a comment and let me know. So very attractive then overall, nicely retro, and just nothing like some of the gaudy offerings by Vostok that I have reviewed and critiqued on the channel in the past. It does wear big for a 40 though, or should I say it looks big for a 40. As discussed, I think it's because it's just all dial. Perhaps the 35mm would be the more historically accurate if you want a retro style watch that has a retro style sizing as well. But hey, you can't knock it for legibility, can you? Those dark hands, dark numerals against that champagne dial. Big dial as it is, no problems at all. Now the strap, perhaps a change to something softer and more compliant would mean it sat nicer on my 7-inch wrist, but hey, I don't think it looks too awful, and the brown at least tones in nicely with the champagne. And legibility is great, big hands, big dial, big numerals, and a reasonable amount of anti-reflective undercoating. And if I take the watch outside natural light, you can see that undercoating doing its stuff in Sydney's sunshine today. I would have loved to have seen it sapphire crystal, but like I said, it is pretty good for mineral crystal. On wrist, big watch but with small dimensions, 47 lug to lug, and a nice downturn from those lugs means it should wear well on wrists smaller than mine. And 11.7mm thick means if you do want to slip a single past NATO or something like that under here, I think it'll wear well on those also. And the pocket shot to finish, they're perhaps not the most obviously blued hands in the world, but you can just about see them glinting in this shot, I think. Moans and niggles, well, I've already discussed most of them already, haven't I? Not a spec monster, 13 meters, mineral crystal, slightly dubious strap notwithstanding. The one thing that I haven't shown you though is the loom, because I think I found something worse than a Pagani. We are not going to be here long. I think the loom lasted approximately 3 minutes, which was about 2 minutes longer than I was expecting it to. Yeah, that dark loom, that kind of grey colour that they've used to dye the paint on the hands, on those numerals, has its price. The price is there is virtually no loom. Neither a spec monster nor a bargain, but I can understand why this particular model has sold out. I'd imagine it's a little bit thinner than some of the automatic versions and, as discussed, more period correct. And let's be honest, there are no shortage of people who are fascinated by that race to space, the race to the moon that took place in the 1960s. I'm sure this one has found homes already in many such collections of watch nerds and space nerds around the world. So there you have it. If you're a space nerd or you're just into Soviet watches, you should definitely consider one of these. Not a spec monster, but very, very pretty. If you don't quite have the budget for one of these, but still want a bit of Soviet era kitsch on your wrist, why not check out the Comandierski or one of my all-time favourite Vostok Amphibias. Thanks for watching. I'll see you again soon.